This episode of the Tasman Racing Report is available at our new homepage. Go check it out at the tasmanracingreport.com. You can catch all the links to wherever you can find this podcast, whether that's YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher. You can grab the RSS feed. It's on Spotify too. And of course, follow me on Twitter, like the podcast page on Facebook. You can keep in touch with all the news on the podcast, analysis videos, any other content we produce. There's some exciting, new, weird, but in a good way, content coming out soon. And most of all, make sure you follow our guests each week, of course, too. If you're interested in the guests, you can grab their Twitter handle right below them. But most of all, Madison Down, a guy I have known for about a decade already, back when I first began sim racing in R Factor, and it's been a delight to bring him onto the podcast. Got a bit closer throughout the E-Series. We spoke a bit more, so let's get to it. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. Welcome to the Tasman Racing Report. Here's Madison Down, a man who... How long's it been since I've been trying to get you onto this podcast? Because I did begin this podcast in 2015, but we first met in 2010. I think I met you. You didn't meet me because you probably don't remember me.
No, that's right. I think you messaged me just before E-Series, actually, and I was a little bit embarrassed when you replied after my message saying, oh, we raced each other back in 2010 in R Factor. And to be honest, I didn't remember you, but once you told me the story, it all clicked.
It was a random Formula One Australian league, and the reason I always remember you, and you probably don't remember me, is because I raced under a fake name. Because on R Factor, you don't use your real names most of the time. Like, you use Mad94D, right? So
yeah, correct, yeah.
I was racing under a name, which I'm not going to tell people. But even on the V8, I used to race we had like Bathurst 1000s back then and everything. And I'm like, man, this guy's the best sim racer I've ever seen in my life. I think you were like my Michael Schumacher growing up in sim racing.
Yeah, interesting to hear. It's funny, it's been a long time since those, it would have been back in 09, 2010, like you said, and a lot's changed since then, including, using actual names now instead of usernames. But, it's nice to know that, to some extent, I had a fan back then. But, obviously, it's got a lot more professional since.
And so the first time I was properly impressed by you was we were on the grid for... Did you say it was Silverstone or Spa? Because you know the story.
I thought it was Spa that we were on the grid for, yeah.
But I think it's Silverstone.
Yeah. So, look, to be honest, I don't know. My memory's shot. So
it's one of the two. So we were at Spa or Silverstone, one of the two circuits, and we were in an F1 league where we were using 2010 cars, and every car was simulated to be like the real thing. So if you drove the Red Bull, you're going to be qualifying on the front row. If you're in the HRT, you got no chance. You're going to qualify last. And you put the Virgin Racing car on the front row. I couldn't believe it, in second place.
Yeah, I was filling in for someone with that round. I'm pretty sure I had Marlon McMullen, who actually still plays iRacing, as a teammate. And he just gave me the call up. We were in this V8 league together and said, hey, I need someone to be my teammate in this F1 league. Only trick is you got to work your way up in this league. So we've got pretty much the worst car on the grid. But you see how you go. You'll probably finish down the back, but see what happens. And I put in a fair bit of practice, and much to my surprise, we were up the front in qualifying. I think it must have done a really good job in quali because the car was pretty off the pace. But I think I was second from memory on the grid. So it was nice.
Yeah, I used to love those leagues. It was like Friday night leagues, and all the blokes were like pretty... They were pretty good communities, everybody was pretty tight-knit, and it was good fun. And see, back then, like, sim racing, this was 2010, right? Because I remember I started sim racing properly in 2008, like your F1 Challenge, your R Factor. Sim racing back then's changed a lot. Like, I feel like these days you have less drivers focusing on qualifying and less drivers DNFing in races. So you have more consistent drivers and you have more finishes per series for certain drivers. So that old style, like hot lapper, I think people have learnt their lesson. They just don't exist anymore in modern day sim racing.
Well, absolutely. I know back then I was one of the biggest hot lap heroes around as a kid. I originally I guess, started with competitive stuff on Gran Turismo, which is all hot lapping. And when I first came across to PC, it was with R Factor, with this F1 league you're talking about, and I was very good at qualifying. But so often I threw the thing in the fence in the race. So just the consistency wasn't there. The depth of field, like you said, like a lot of guys had good one lap speed, but then they couldn't do more than 5 or 10 laps in a row without actually binning the car. So and back then it was so much different to now. There was no sponsorship, no broadcast, no nothing. We were all there purely for fun, and there was no pressure. But yeah, I guess a lot more mistakes as well. So.
See, the thing I've noticed with you is a lot of people will probably say you're famous from iRacing and for iRacing, but I feel like you're the classical sim racer, and this is a good thing, where you love a multitude of different simulators. Like, I think I've seen you on Race Room before. You love R Factor. That's where you began. Gran Turismo, actually, if you think back in the day, if you classify that as a sim. But of course, like it's something where, like, what appeals you to all these different sims? Because sometimes people find it hard to jump from sim to sim. They can't be competitive. They don't have that natural talent.
Yeah, for me, I kind of always chased where the competition was. So originally, I guess I got introduced to online racing through Gran Turismo with Gran Turismo 5 Prologue. But that was mainly hot lapping, and I did a couple of events at a website called GT Planet. And that was all good fun, and then I kind of wanted to get across and race V8s, which I had to get into R Factor to do. And around that R Factor time, yeah, I raced a lot. Raced in lots of different leagues, lots of different websites, lots of different series. I was just jumping around racing anything and everything I could. As well as, yeah, like you said, Race Room came out. I did some stuff on that. GTR2. What else was there? GT Legends. Like, there was a bunch of games around that era that were really, really good PC simulations that were very similar to each other, and I pretty much had a crack at all of them in those 1 or 2 years back then.
GTR2, is that the most underrated simulator of all time? Or maybe behind
I really liked it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not a fan of GT racing, but even I saw the appeal in that sim. I'll take that back. I feel like the most underrated sim of all time is what's that one by the Brazilian team that was built using R Factor?
That's like that. Is it Stock Car? Something Stock Car.
Stock Car Brazil. I can't remember. Game Stock Car. That's it.
Yeah, that's the one.
That was a good one too. I feel like that might be the number one most underrated sim. So you didn't get into Live for Speed at all?
Yeah, actually, just before R Factor, a mate of mine from school told me I had to try LFS, Live for Speed, and I didn't even have a wheel compatible with a computer at that point. So he was showing me all these drift servers back in the day, and we're using mouse and keyboard to drive the cars, and he said to me, you should probably, you get right into your sims, you should probably start looking a bit more at these PC sims. And that was kind of him that introduced me to PC. And I only did that for about a month. And I was all about, he was saying, this sim's so great. It's got all this great tire model. It's got this, it's got that. You feel the car. And I was just like, nah, I just want R Factor. That's where the V8s are. That's where the Australian tracks are. Just give me R Factor. Much to his dismay, he didn't agree with me. But yeah, obviously I spent a lot more time on R Factor after that.
And you're someone who we found unique in the Supercars Eseries that you wrote, I've been sim racing for over 2 decades, yet you're 18 years old? Like, it makes no sense, So you've been sim racing basically since you're 3-4 years old. And I don't know, I've jumped into, for example, if you ever play a first person shooter, I'm so shit at those. I'm terrible. Yeah. I can't move. I'm literally the worst rank you could possibly be in any of those games. And then I'm thinking, why am I good at sim racing? Why am I always quick with driving cars? And even if I didn't get my first wheel ever until 2010, but I reckon that since I'd been playing racing games since 2002, since I was really, really young, even if it was on a gamepad, I still feel like you learn simple things like car control and everything. Even if it's not muscle memory, you just learn that kind of stuff. So then now when I jump into a car and with no practice, I'm still relatively competitive compared to other people. Do you is that why you're so good? Because you've been doing it since you were 3-4?
I 100% agree. I've been playing since I've got photos of me actually sitting on a PC sim, or PC sim, desk chair, all this stuff back in the day on all the cream white computers and appliances and all that type of thing. But I've got photos of that from about 1996, 1997. So I was born in 94, so 3 years old, and I was already using back in the day originally a Thrustmaster, the original Thrustmaster wheel my old man bought back then, which then morphed into a Logitech Wingman, which was the first force feedback wheel we had. It had paddle shift, it had all these great things that were brand new. But that was on games like Jeff Crammon Grand Prix 2, Jeff Crammon Grand Prix 3, 4, the original Need for Speed 2, Need for Speed 3. There was an Aussie developer called Ratbag that did a game called Power Slide, which is probably, to this day, one of the best games for simulating sliding physics, and that came out in 1998 from memory. Yeah. So all of these, like, I just used to open a folder of games as a kid, 4 or 5 years old, and go, oh, do I want to play, Formula 1 from 1994? Do I want to play it from 1998? Do I want to, power slide these cars in Power Slide? What, Need for Speed? Do I want arcade? Do I want sim? I just had a multitude of games. I think I had about 20 racing games back then that I grew up playing on a wheel from a very early age. And then I've moved into PlayStation, like you said, using a gamepad. But that varying sims and arcade games and stuff like that, I think just playing one game all day in the holidays one day, and then moving to, say, Jeff Crammon Grand Prix 2 the next day, you had to learn to adapt to stuff. And I even back then, I was very, very competitive with myself and always chasing PBs.
GP2, GP3, GP4, the only games to have live marshals clean up cars from sand traps and stuff like that. I remember I used to I'm like, oh, what happens if I steer into Jacques Villeneuve here? What's going to happen? And then obviously the next lap you come around and you're like, oh, look, they're cleaning his car, right? And I'm like, oh, I'll restart the race now, and I just wanted to see what happened.
It had stuff in it, those games, that we still don't have now. I spent a lot of time on those Jeff Crammon games, and I'm sure, as you said, you would have played them back in the day, and they were not easy games. And as a 5-6 year old driving around with no driving aids turned on and trying to make it all work and get quicker and quicker, it's probably a large part of why I ended up quick later in life. But like you said, there was marshals on the track. It used to crane the cars over the fence. I remember Adelaide in Grand Prix 2. I used to love driving Adelaide because that was a track that they no longer visited. And I remember if you hit the curb too hard at the centre chicane, turn 1 and 2, used to tear the front wing off the car. That doesn't even happen in iRacing now. If you hit a curb too hard in an open wheeler, it doesn't tear the front wing off. So even gravel traps, I remember at Pouon at Spa, there used to be gravel on the outside there in that game. And if you ran off through the gravel at full tilt, it used to tear the front wing off the car. So stuff like that still doesn't happen in simulation games now. So it's pretty cool looking back at those days.
And we talk all simulation, but even when I jump into a car, or even if I go to like a rental car track, you race in the real world, obviously. Just doing that kind of stuff, like I really do feel like it helps when you jump into that kind of stuff, learning all this stuff from sim racing and racing games when you're younger. Because I've smacked like my mates when I was younger. Now I'm 6'1" and heavier, so I'm not really strong in kart. But I have smacked a lot of friends and beaten them up at a karting track because I'm like, oh, I'm learning things that they've never done in their lives.
Yeah, correct. Like I was lucky enough to, on my 7th birthday, get a go-kart. I never actually raced the kart. I only ever did just practice days and whatnot. But I remember the first drive of that kart, and I just approached it exactly the same as what I did playing Jeff Crammon Grand Prix games back in the day. And that was in 2001, so I would have been playing GP3 and GP4 at that time. And I remember getting out of the kart and saying to my dad that was just the same as racing Grand Prix on the computer. And he was like, he couldn't get over it. He was like, what do you, and this is in an era like 2001, simulation games are nothing like they are now, but he was kind of saying to me as a 7-year-old, what do you mean it's like the game? This is actually real life. You're driving an actual go-kart on a racetrack and you're trying to tell me that this is just the same as playing a computer. And looking back at it, I can probably understand his frustration because he's just spent a few grand on a go-kart, and then I'm telling him it's just the same as playing a computer game. But yeah, honestly, right from the start, I've always thought that having that computer game knowledge really helps.
And I've always been fascinated with that because I look at you. You've seen Max Verstappen's like iRacing stats now. He's got like he's done what, like one race. He's got like a 15,000 I rating. What is it? Like, it's so impressive. And he it's not actually that, ladies and gentlemen. Let me tell you that, please. Someone's probably commenting right now saying you're wrong. But why is he good in the sim and good in real life, yet like you take some other race car drivers who just suck in sim racing, but they're like champions in the real world? Is that because they base it on in the real world they drive more on feel and through their butt? Are there different methods you can do it in the real world, or do you have an answer to that? I've never figured it out.
Yeah, I have thought about that one a bit. I think with all these young up-and-coming Formula One drivers like your Lando Norris's and Max Verstappen's, like you mentioned, who are really quick in iRacing with a bunch of world records and amazing stats, those guys have, like me and you, probably grown up playing sim racing games from a very early age, using a wheel and pedals on PlayStation or computer or whatever they're doing, and they're learning to feel the car in a different way. So say you grab someone like a Mark Skay for a Jamie Whincup, or someone a bit older that's done racing, they haven't grown up playing computer games and playing simulation games, so they've only got that go-karting stage of their life coming through, whereas a lot of young guys now they've got the sim and the go-kart. And I know for me, weirdly, again, a bit of a story, but when I first drove the Cobra replica that I'm lucky enough to drive, that my dad has now, I drove that on a racetrack for the first time when I was 16. And actually, similar to what I said in go-karting when I was 7, and I got a similar response from my dad. But it was... and that car's got no power steering. To give you a bit of background, it's got no power steering at all, and quite wide tyres, semi-slicks, all the above, so should give you pretty heavy steering and good feel. I jumped out of the car and said, I can't feel a thing through the steering of this car. Like, I got no feel. I don't know how to drive it. I don't know where the limit is. I've got no idea. I said I can feel a little bit, but I can feel so much more with my Logitech wheel in iRacing. Like, I can't feel the curbs, I can't feel the bumps, I can't feel when I've locked up. I've just got no idea what the feel. But my dad replied, well, you don't feel it all through the steering wheel in real life. You feel it through the seat of the pants. You feel it through your bum. You feel the car sliding. You feel it moving. And I said, that's all good, but in sim racing, you don't have that. So you learn to feel the car at the limit in a different way. You listen for sounds. You feel like the feel you get through the wheel is so much more important.
Yeah.
And when that feel changes, it just throws off all your senses. It takes a while to adjust to that change. And I think that's where, like, getting back to the original point, these younger guys have got a good skill set because they can feel a car in more ways than one.
See, someone needs to do like a royal commission on this. We should get the Australian government to fund it or something. Royal commission into why some people are good at sim racing and why some people
yeah. Well, I say all that, but at the same time, you've still got young guys who are very fast in the sim and not that quick in real life, and vice versa. So I think it's probably a similar thing to, you see guys in go-karting who are really quick in karts, and then, say, I've beaten Jamie Whincup, or I've beaten, whoever it might be in karts, and then they never went anywhere in cars. They might have got the opportunity, they might not have, but I've definitely seen that both ways, where there's people who are quicker in one form, and then when they go to the car, where it's a totally different feel with all that extra weight and the way the car slides compared to a go-kart. They just don't ever get on top of it.
I mean, look at Alex Albon in Formula One.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Probably one of the best karters of all time, success-wise. And then he jumped into, I think it was probably one of the worst drop-offs I've ever seen a motor racer or driver motor race. I'm talking like I don't know the sport. Like a like a driver's ever had. Like you look at how well he fared in Formula 3. He was terrible. GP2, I've always said if you don't win GP2 in your first season, you're probably not a 5-star driver, meaning you're not a Schumacher, a Hamilton, a Verstappen, Vettel, those kinds of guys.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, now it's like he's not that bad. Like maybe he might improve in the future. But yeah, some people can struggle from even just karts to cars, which is a big jump.
Yeah, and I think that largely comes back to what I was saying about with karts. There's no suspension. It's very little weight. Center of gravity is really low. If you have a moment, basically, and it's no different in high karts. And you said before you've driven them, basically a flick of the wrist and you've caught it in karts. Whereas in a car, a flick of the wrist isn't good enough. You've got to do a hell of a lot more than that and be far more ahead of what the car's doing than what you need to be in a kart. A kart, I find you can almost be a bit more reactive with it to what the kart actually does. With a car, you've got to have a better understanding of what the car's going to do before it actually does it. To make sure that you don't throw it off the road. So, I don't know. Maybe that might be the reason. That might not be the reason that people get varying results. But I think it's got something to do with that. People can disagree with me, but I think it's got something to do with that.
So let's find out if you're human. Do you struggle in any type of car? Like, you could say, "Oh, wait, I'm not you know what? I'm not good at rally." I'll be like, "Oh, he's human."
Yeah. Well, that's actually a pretty good example. Actually, to think of it, I was gonna say, mostly like I go pretty well at adapting to stuff, as you said earlier, like adapting to sims. I was always known for in the early days of sim racing, being able to jump from Gran Turismo to R Factor to Race Room to GTR to GT Legends to all of these games, and then to iRacing, and then back to R Factor, and pretty much be competitive in every single thing that I did, no matter how much I jumped around. I think circuit racing for me is definitely my strong point. I think that, rally is definitely not. And to some extent, even rally cross, now that's come out in iRacing. I'm not particularly good at rally cross either. I'm okay, but I'm nowhere near as competitive as in circuit. So I think stuff on dirt, I struggle.
We need Aussies in the series because I've been hounding Bo Albert for the past 3 months, asking him why he quit the pro qualifiers, but he told me he'll be back for 2020. So you got a teammate at least already, like a rallycross team.
Yeah. See how we go. Like Josh Rogers seems to be good at everything, and he's De Jong's teammate and good mates with him. So maybe we can get a couple in there. But I'd need to do a lot of work. But yeah, like on Dirt Rally, which I know is a fantastic game and I love it. But I'm no good at it. At one point, we did like one of those leaderboards where you get one shot and you've got to see how you go. And I was always down the bottom. All my teammates are all flogging me, and I'm hopeless at rally. So yeah, I am human if you can't rally, I guess.
Yeah, well, we figured it out, everybody. Talking about real world racing though, I mean, you're wearing a is that a Shannons Nationals top at the moment that you're wearing?
Oh, this is just my Shannons shirt that I got from E-Series. So
from the E-Series,
just a big E-Series shirt. But yeah,
that's a good start because we know you race Shannons Nationals, of course. You race. Is that where you race the Cobra in Shannons Nationals?
Nah, look, the Cobra stuff, I only ever do club level stuff. So things like Super Sprints, New South Wales Super Sprints, and there's a sports car Super Sprint we do, and as well as Cobra car club events. So basically, I'm quite good at hot lapping, so that goes across to real life as well. I'd love to actually do proper door-to-door racing, but mainly for me it's coming out on pretty new tyres, time attack tyres, and having a big crack, seeing how we go and pushing 11 tenths every lap and seeing what lap time we can get. But for me, the only racing experience I've got is those super sprints, as well as I did Aussie racing cars at Homebush in 2013. So that's my real world claim to fame. I won that through a competition that Race Centre did, Race to Reality it was called. Basically won my drive through an iRacing event, and the final was actually on R Factor on motion sims. So that gets back to that original point about adaptability and me being pretty okay at that. So won that final and did a round of Aussie racing cars. So yeah.
And that's the same what was it called? Race Sim Center? I can't remember the place. Simulation.
Yeah, race centre. So they've got a place in
Darling Harbour?
Darling Harbour in Sydney.
Yeah.
Yeah. As
We
well
we went
as
there.
somewhere. Yeah, yeah. Where that night we all met up before the media day, and yeah, you were there that night, and we saw a race centre in Sydney. There, we were at Hard Rock Cafe next door. So yeah, that was the place that final happened, and yeah, plenty of good memories there, and obviously the prize there was one I'll never forget.
We'll talk about the E Series later. So you, I mean, obviously your family's into racing because your dad wouldn't have bought you a kart. So that sort of like tells me your family's like into motor racing and all that kind of stuff. But for you, did your parents or did any other siblings race at all when they were younger, like more than you did?
No, it was kind of. I guess I'm probably one of the first, so no one's really done it. All that happened was basically everyone in my family has always loved racing and loved cars, but no one's ever got into it. My dad always, growing up, always wanted to build a Cobra replica kit car, but I remember the age of 33 he was, because he used to use that as a racing number on his kart. And basically he went to a show in Sydney to look at buying a Cobra. Got all these brochures and stuff. Came home, said to mum, "Hey, how about this?" And she said, "How about no? That's way too much money. You're not getting one. So, find something different." So Dad went and bought himself a go kart, and that's how that kind of started. And we started doing a bit of just practice days and stuff like that. And then when I was old enough, bought me one, and we just went out karting. My dad, myself, my uncle, spent a lot of my childhood doing it. At one point, we were doing it as often as once every 2 weeks, once every fortnight. We were going to the track, just having fun, just having skids in the karts, and I guess that kind of moved up to then eventually he was granted permission to buy a Cobra, and we started doing track days and super sprints and all that type of thing. And in the background that whole time, I'd been playing simulation games, playing computer games, which is probably, little did I know at the time as a kid, but it's probably aided my driving ability, not just in the sim now, but also real life, because we've actually, I managed to win the Cobra Nationals, which is a big event for us in the Cobra Club, and our cars, statistically speaking, shouldn't be the quickest car around a track, but at Wakefield Park a couple of months ago, we managed to go the fastest the street registered Cobra's actually gone around the track down there at Wakefield. So
Nice.
all of that sim racing time, I think, has led to that point. And like you said, family's interested in it, but I guess there was no history before I guess I was born. It's kind of all happened in my lifetime.
You got to start better late than never. It's not where you
That's right.
start, it's
That's
where you
right.
finish. That's my favorite. That's one of my
Correct.
favorite quotes ever. But as we can tell, you might be the Stig because your helmet is full white.
Yeah. Yeah,
Ben
yeah,
Collins.
full wide helmet. Yeah, I try. I try to rag everything. Everything I get in, I try to drive the wheels off it. Actually, just before this podcast, I was having a chat with my dad and my uncle. They were both around tonight, and we're talking about adaptability, and we were talking about that in sim earlier. But I actually had my uncle's got a Commodore production car, and and I had a steer of that at Wakefield on that same day, just in a fun session at the end of the day, just to, give him some feedback on setup and whatnot. I think I did 4 or 5 laps in the car, and I beat his personal best that he had done on new tyres on basically old street rubber. In those 4 or 5 laps driving the car. So he was a bit pissed at me, but at the same time he said, it's pretty cool that you jumped in the car and drove it that fast, that quickly with no prior knowledge. So yeah, I'd like to think that's a Stig trait.
Well, you can always use the age excuse, but at the same time,
Yeah.
I think that's just the handing of the generations now. You sort of just have to concede, the younger generations, they're just better than me.
Yeah.
I wouldn't
I
mind
think
if
they're
my
starting
son,
to concede defeat. I think they're starting to give up. Not that I'm always trying to, because I don't have my own car. I'm always trying to be the guy that motivates and pushes them, because it's very, very easy for either of those two guys to just not give me the keys to drive it. So I'm always like, no, you can improve. But I've got around about 2 seconds in most times on the track.
I wouldn't, in the future, I mean, I don't have any kids now, but I wouldn't mind if my son or daughter kick my ass like at something I'm good at. But as long as it's not in the first like 10 to 12 years of their life, after that I'll be like,
Yeah.
you know what? 13th year, if you can beat me, that's a good sign you're going to go somewhere pro with this. Then you can like, oh, you know what? Like, hey, you know, little man or little woman, you're like, you should play pro sports, and then they can fund the rest of your career with the millions of dollars you earn. So I've set out your lifestyle
Yeah.
for you in the future. You can fund a little V8 supercar champion. He heads to NASCAR, or she, and they fund the rest of your retirement, mate. How does that sound?
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones for my dad that we're not doing racing at a high level and we're certainly not earning money from it, but even with those little super sprint days and stuff like that, the car is definitely a standout, and even with the lap times he does, we're very quick. And I guess it's nice for him, and he said it before that if he can't win, at least his car and his son is winning and getting the trophies and getting the accolades and stuff like that. It's one of those ones where I'm sure it's very demoralising for him to see his car going around substantially faster, but at the same time, at least it's his car and he's contributing to it. So yeah, like you said, I think that's what we'd all hope for later in life when we have families.
Did I leave anything out with racing? Not sim racing,
Nah,
just normal racing.
Nah, yeah, I think they covered it off like with super sprints and like Aussie race cars. I guess Aussie race cars was a cool one for me. That was going straight to a national level, having done no prior door-to-door racing. So, and I guess to do it at a street circuit as well was really it was baptism by fire a little bit, because Homebush was renowned for pulling solo mistakes out of drivers, and yeah, to go out there and have never done a race, and then to actually first time out do a street circuit event with no room for error was pretty cool, and being on TV and whatnot. So that's hands down the biggest thing I've done. But yeah, look, apart from that, I haven't done too much. So I think we've covered most of it off.
Were you thinking about going through the left-hander down the back end of the circuit, saying like, oh, should I just put this in the fence just to see what it felt like for all those guys 10 years ago?
There was an article that Auto Action did, and the slogan or the tagline they put on it on Facebook, I still remember it, was a photo of me standing in front of the Aussie race car just candidly in the pits. And they said, this guy is making his racing debut tomorrow from sim racer to reality. If you could give him one piece of advice, what would it be? And and someone's commented on it and said that basically along the lines of the concrete hurts a lot more in real life. He'll need to get used to it because he'll be in their first session tomorrow. And I was like, wow, that's pretty blunt, but also pretty funny. And it was one of those things where I actually thought about what you said. I thought to myself, I wonder what hitting a concrete wall in a race car feels like. And touch wood,
fun.
I've never actually got to experience it. I'm not sure I want to, but I guess it's on the track walk, actually, funnily enough, I walked around and tapped the wall down at turn 1 and went, yep, it's solid. That's going to hurt if you hit it.
Yeah. I remember Lewis Hamilton was on Top Gear. This is in like his rookie season. And do you remember when he went into the wall at the Nürburgring, he just had a tire blowout?
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, and I think there was one time in preseason testing, he like went backwards into the wall, and he was saying it's actually quite cool going into a wall at 200 miles an hour. And I was like, you know what? If someone told me I was going to come out safe from that, I'd be like, oh, that's actually quite cool. I want to know what it feels like. You get airborne and everything. I think it would be fun.
Yeah. I think tire wall wouldn't be too bad, but yeah, the concrete would be real solid. Yeah, very solid. And I think that was probably the thing I was worried about most. There was not. I had trust in my own ability to not end up in the fence, and obviously I didn't that weekend. I had a completely clean weekend, but the thing that worried me most was there's so many blind corners at street circuits and no room to react. If someone in the pack in front of you ends up in the fence, in a lot of cases at a street circuit, you've got nowhere to go. So, and that damage and that cost and that experience is going to be all on you, despite it not being your fault. So that was the thing that was constantly sitting in the back of my head, thinking I really want this weekend to go well, but at the same time, I really don't want to have an incident, I'm confident that I can keep it out of the fence, but I just don't want someone in front of me or someone dive bombing me or something to put me into that wall. So and that so often happens, and we've seen it time and time again at those tracks. It's so hard to pass, and people make desperado moves, especially in National Series. But hey, it all went well that weekend, and I've got a good experience that I can recall, and I'd love to do it again, but massive cost involved.
So Supercars Eseries, if we go back to but pre-media day, the night before, the Hog's Breath, what was it? The Hog's Breath Cafe dinner. So I wasn't there in Sydney for media day. Obviously, I was in there covering the Logitech G Challenge for Project Cast 2. And then I don't know how I heard, but I for some reason I knew that someone told me that you're all coming into Sydney today. And for those who weren't obviously lived in New South Wales, and you're going to have media day tomorrow. So I think that's how I found out. So I ended up messaging Josh Rogers, and I was like, hey, mate, you in Sydney? Like, I'm just wondering, what's going on? He's like, yeah, we're all going out for dinner tonight. So I was like, oh, fuck yeah. All right. Caught up for dinner. And I'm like, man, I got to meet everybody for the first time. I'd never seen anybody. And it's weird. Like, you see, it's like seeing famous people. Like seeing Hobbo in person. It's like, holy shit.
Yeah.
This is the guy from the streams.
That was a really good night. I've got great recollections of that night. Also had a serious lack of sleep after that night. After I said I was going to go home at about 10 o'clock, I think we were at the casino till about 1. And then I had to be back I drove all the way home an hour and a half, and then I was back in Sydney at 7 the next day. So it was a fantastic night. And I didn't want to go home that night. I really wished I got a hotel and could stay out later. That was just the best night, as having that. I gotta say, that's probably my favourite experience of the whole E-Series thing, was just getting 12 drivers that that talented and that genuine of people. Like, there was no driver in the E-Series that was an asshole. Everyone is so friendly. Everyone is kind of exactly the way you expect them to be. That you've raced against them for years online, and then to meet up with everybody and get 12 of the best sim racers in Australia in one place, having dinner, going out for drinks, all of that stuff. You just couldn't organize that if you tried. So that was just awesome.
So when I met everybody, you're all going to, I think the venue changed. So we're all meant to meet somewhere, I can't remember. Ended up meeting at Hog's Breath. And the first thing I remember that happened was I think the first thing I heard was that Jake Burton bought a drink for some random girl at the table next to us, but for on Josh Rogers' behalf. So the girl thought it was Josh Rogers who bought the drink. So that's what kicked off my evening. Then that's
well, look, you said the venue changed. So what actually happened was we all went to this venue. I arrived there, and I think Jake wasn't there yet. It was like Dane and Richard and a few others. Anyway, I don't remember who was there first. It's not the point. I got on to them and I said, I'm at this place. Where is everyone? Like, no one's here. And they said, oh no, Jake picked the venue. And I said, well, why did Jake pick the venue? He's from Perth. He knows nothing about Sydney. He's like literally never even been there pretty much before. And he goes, yeah, we went to that venue. It was crap. So we've actually just gone up to Race Centre and Hard Rock Cafe, and we're going up there. Yeah. And I said, okay, no worries. Yeah, it was Hard Rock. I think. Yeah. In Darling Harbour. Similar style of venue though. And yeah, we've gone up there, and I think we waited. Before you got there, we actually, because that was my suggestion to go there. So then I kind of put it all onto me, which, put the pressure on. And then we've walked in, wanted a table, and it took, I think it took around about 45 minutes or 50 minutes or something to get a table. So then I'm wearing all the abuse off everybody. Why we come to this venue and standing here waiting for a table for an hour, it better be good and all this crap. So and then you got there a bit later, and everyone was stitching each other up. Burton set that one up, which was an absolute beauty, and I felt extremely embarrassed for Rogers, because if you've ever seen Rogers and you would have with the E-Series, and you ever do meet him in person, anyone out there, he's one of the most genuine and shy guys out. and he's not outgoing like that at all. So for him to be faced with a table, it was like, I don't know how many people on that table. It's probably 15, 20 people or something at this family dinner they were having, and they've all just cracked up laughing, and I felt so bad for him. But Rogers tried to get him back. Do you remember that?
Yeah, was that with the after he won the Watkins Glen race? He brought the pickle sandwich or something.
Not even that. Before that, on the same night, right?
Oh, the birthday thing.
Rogers, the birthday thing. Yes. So then
Sunday.
Burton. Yeah, so Burton gets an ice cream or sundae thing brought across and put down in front of him, and the waiter says, "I hear it's your birthday today." And Burton's like, "No, no, 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 no. It's not my birthday." We all just start singing happy birthday to him. So,
Yeah.
he tried to get him back there and then, but yeah, it's continued on with all that Uber stuff going on between each round.
I think is at Hard Rock Cafe, I'm not that experienced there. Or Hog's Breath. Why did I call it Hog's Breath before? I don't know. But apparently they sing happy birthday to someone and give you a free Sunday. So we got Jake Burton a free Sunday. Man, that's hilarious. I forgot about that.
It was a good night.
Sunday.
It was a good night.
But then, so the biggest thing I remember from that night, this is weird, but when we went to the casino, we all got a drink, and then we're watching Monza qualifying, and, and Q3 was on, and it was like, we watched it on, obviously there's no sound, and we're like, I don't think any of these drivers are going to make the checkered flag, and they didn't.
No, that was insane, wasn't it? Like, and again, that gets back to the point I was saying before. To have 12 sim races and, plus yourself there on that night, all in one place. And we went to the casino, we went to the sports bar because we knew Formula One was on and we're all like-minded people, wanted to watch it.
Yeah.
And, I just remember that session, how cool was it sitting there and we're all just looking at each other like, what the hell are we seeing on TV at the moment? And all of us are in disbelief. But normally, we're sitting at home watching Formula One by ourselves in the middle of the night. That night, we were sitting there with 12 other really enthusiastic sim racers that know exactly what's going on, watching qual. It was, I can't speak highly enough of that whole experience. It was so cool.
Yeah, I really wish I didn't have to fly out the next day. But
yeah.
So the thing was, I don't know if you know this part of the story, but I flew in that Saturday morning and we were out the Saturday night. So normally I'm supposed to fly in the Friday night, but my flight got cancelled. So I don't live that far from the airport. Sydney apparently had like one runway open, so they had to close it. I don't know how it works. Sydney's airport's bloody... Well, you got a curfew at like 11 p.m, I think.
Yeah, 11 o'clock, yeah.
So anyway, I fly out the next morning on Saturday. Wish I could have stayed for media day, but there was Scops. So Jay Kennedy brought me in for Scops for my first ever Scops broadcast. And I was like, hell yeah, I get to do a Scops broadcast. It's going to be awesome. Prepped for it. Did all my prep. I was on the plane doing my notes, all this kind of stuff. So then on the Sunday morning, my flight's expected to land, like 3 hours before Scops start. End up getting delayed, the flight. I stay in I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to go to the toilet. I'm going to get on the flight, then go to the toilet because I don't have time. I need to get my notes done. And then I get on the flight at Sydney and they say, we're going to have to wait for 45 minutes at the terminal to then get the flight going. And I'm thinking, fuck, do I go to the toilet now? Or do I? There's like 2-3 people between me. So I held it in for 45 minutes, man.
Oh, bloody hell.
I just can't be bothered dealing with having I'm too big, man. I'm the 6'1", I can't be bothered squeezing in between people on the plane. Anyway, moral of the story is, got my notes done, made it home from the airport with, I think, 10 minutes to spare to the Scops, to the beginning of the broadcast. Got my notes ready, got everything done, and then all of a sudden it becomes the shortest Scops broadcast in history because we had issues and the broadcast had to be cancelled.
I actually forgot the broadcast got cancelled. I was too busy that day running on one for no sleep and trying not to be too embarrassing in the media day stuff, but when none of us were media experts. But I remember we were due to be done at about 12:30, 1 o'clock. That was the sponsored drivers as opposed to the real world drivers. And it was a bit controversial actually because you had guys like Jared Filsell and Ian Ford and Ethan Grigalt, Jake Burton, all those guys running in the afternoon session at the media day. So they were in the real world teams. So they were going to miss Scops. And I actually we were done at 1. So Muggo and I co-drove together. Richard Hampstead got to go home as well, drive. Same with Emily Jones. Oh, actually, no, Emily Jones didn't get to go home, but she could have if she was in Sydney. But yeah, we all got to go home and race. And we did very little practice, and we got TTR got absolutely flogged in that race. We were very ill prepared, but we scored points. But yeah, that was a bit of a controversial one. I kind of forgot actually that the Sculpts run was that same one as the media day. It was a bit of an unfortunate timing, but yeah, it was weird. Like we got to go out there at the media day, rush home, and I actually went back to Sydney that night because I had so much fun the night before and that day. Jake Burton messaged me and said, "Oi, come back to Sydney." So I've driven. I live about 75 k's out of Sydney, right? So I've gone home, raced Scops, rushed home to race Scops, 500 k's at Imola, whatever it was, and then gone. As soon as Scops finished, had a really bad race. Was down in the dumps. We had no pace. We got absolutely flogged. Down in the dumps, and Burton goes, "No, you should come out and hang out with your mates again." So I jumped back in the car and drove to Sydney to watch a 9:30 or 10 o'clock movie in George Street in the event cinemas there. And I looked down at the ticket, and the movie went for 100. It was like some scary movie, and it went for 180. It was It 2, that's it.
Oh, geez.
And it went for 180 something minutes. And I've looked at the ticket and gone, "Are you friggin' kidding me?" Like the night before, I had 3 or 4 hours sleep, and now I've come back to Sydney and I'm watching a 3-hour movie with Rogers and Burton. And I've got work tomorrow at 7. So, anyway, look, I wouldn't trade that weekend for anything. Like, I'm complaining about it, but I went forward and back from Sydney in that week, or those few days. I think I clocked about 700 k's or something in like 4 days between work and driving back to Sydney, back and forth. It was absolutely insane. I was so wrecked on the Monday after it.
Man, you clocked 700 k's in the real car and on the sim.
Yeah, that's right. Like between the
Ks.
sim and real life, it would have been insane.
Tell me what media day was like, because you've obviously never experienced having a camera in your face asking you about, well, apart from this podcast, but you like it was. I found it interesting, and obviously, you know, everybody behind the scenes there at Supercars, the producers at Beyond Action, like I thought they did a really splendid job. It was, I reckon, on the level of F1 esports, which I think's up there. I think the Supercars Eseries was a top level run. And produce sort of sim racing esports type of series. I've never seen
100%.
anything better than it.
100%. I totally agree. The production quality was phenomenal. The broadcast quality was phenomenal. And a lot of those shots were obviously taken from that media day. So we had 4 stations that day. We did some laps on the sims. So we had 4 simulators set up, next level rigs set up, and we just cut laps on it, and they had a camera around there all day filming shots. So a lot of the shots you saw on the telecast were from the media day, or round 1, but mainly from the media day as well, of close-ups of feet and hands, and all of us kind of sitting around the sims having a drive. We had the hero shot, which was the one in front of the big screen. That one was probably... Yeah, the best one, but also the most awkward thing I've probably ever done. Like, it's just, like, I was so worried watching it, just watching it back later, I thought, oh man, it felt so wrong standing there in this big empty space with a screen with your name and your sponsor all behind it and everything like that. But it turned out really well. They absolutely nailed it. They did such a good job. Look, you never... I'm a guy who doesn't really like seeing myself on camera. So it was a bit awkward to watch. But overall, it looks super professional. And just standing there watching this camera go around you on this big crane for about 15 minutes, just like thinking, I don't want to do anything that's going to look crap on camera. So, yeah, and then we had a couple of profile pics as well. That was another station. That was only quick. It was basically 3 shots of us, and that was what you saw with the overlays and the results and that type of thing. And then we were in an interview room for around about 15, 20 minutes.
Was that downstairs?
So, yeah, downstairs in the interview room. So we were downstairs there for 15, 20 minutes roughly. Basically, we probably all got asked about somewhere between 20 and 30 questions, and we just elaborated on the answers. Obviously, not all of that got used because those profiles that we did were only around about a minute or two on the actual broadcasts. But yeah, they had a lot of content there. So we probably had an hour to an hour and a half worth of work to do in terms of being in front of a camera and that whole process. The one that was really probably off-putting for a lot of us, but I'm sure we're all thanking them now, was makeup. None of us had done that before, I don't think. Maybe apart from Emily. I think Emily's done makeup before, but the rest of us were like, oh my God, we got to do makeup. And I think they absolutely assured us that you guys will be all thanking us later for this because on TV you look more shiny and all that type of stuff. They explained it to us, but yeah, really interesting day. Just something that not really any of us had done before. I'd done a couple of big screen interviews and a few things online. Obviously, we get interviewed for broadcasts and stuff like that. I did a few radio interviews for the Aussie Race Car thing as well. So that event gave me a little bit of I guess practice, but still nothing that was that focused and that prepared. It was a really interesting day.
No, even the night before or the day before, just seeing everybody in that in the E-Series, in the esports arena, everybody's just sort of like preparing what's going to be here. This is where we're going to do this, and they're sort of just still trying to make amendments to all the plans they had for the past couple of weeks. So like even the night before, they've been thinking about it. Doesn't mean they weren't prepared. It was just like just confirming everything's right. Like they really wanted this series to go well. And for those who have never been to the esports arena, obviously because it's a Gfinity run series, it's exactly like the F1 esports arena. So you walk in, you've got your downstairs, your upstairs level, you got the control room. I don't know where that is, whether that's down the back of the cinema. It's a cinema turned into an esports arena.
Yeah, correct. So they've basically taken that whole floor area that's normally in front of the screen and built a massive display, a big stage basically for the arena and the desk and the sims and all that. And obviously it got used for everything Gfinity did, whether it was Rocket League or CSGO or whatever. And same format internationally as well. Like you said, for F1 esports, they use that same style of arena. But basically they had like a makeup room underneath because the stage was built up. And they had like a few other little rooms. I don't know what they did with them, but they had a few other rooms. They didn't use one for the interviews. But then the profile pics, for instance, and the directing and all that, I think that was all done up in the projector rooms, which are up the back of the cinema. So normally, even if I even thought about it, like I've never been in a projector room before. Obviously, there was no projectors in there, but it was interesting to see even that, like the back of a cinema and what that all looks like up there. And yeah, it was cool, and it made for a really cool round one as well because we had the first round there, and that was awesome having us all there and the cameras around, and we had about probably 100 people. Pretty much, it was probably a three-quarter full cinema, so we had it was probably somewhere between 80 to 100 people. Just three-quarter full cinema in there. I know, like for me, I had 5 family there, and there was about 8 to 10 Shannons team members there as well. So just for me, I had around about 15 people there watching. So yeah, that was really cool, and that was set up. Just imagine a cinema with that set that you saw on TV, and that's exactly what it was.
But you got really used to the sims well, because that's a big deal in sim racing. Like I've seen guys, we cover as I said, we covered the Logitech G Challenge at the arena, and then a month later we covered the regional final, but it was at PAX. And at the arena, we were just there as studio, we didn't have a live round there. But then at PAX, we invited all the drivers for the live round. And I think the number 1 ranked driver there was like one of the worst, I think. And it was like, this guy isn't 1 second off the pace from the guy who won. He's one of the best. It's just sometimes getting used to the sims a big deal. But that's something that you seem to manage really well. Now, is that because you have, I think you guys use G920s, right? Is that because you have one at home? But I can see your wheel now. It's not a G920 to me.
It's deceiving. I've got so for me, we touched on it a bit earlier. I've always been pretty good at adapting to stuff really quickly. So my setup at home is currently a hyperstimulator cockpit that I've been using. I've got a Logitech G27 steering wheel. It's got an aftermarket wheel rim and a button plate on it, but it is a Logitech G27 wheel. And I, halfway through the E-Series, I switched from Fanatec Club Sports to HE pedals, HE Sprints. So
Nice.
going from basically that type of high-end stuff to the Logitech G920, which is a good wheel, and as I said, I use a Logitech G wheel at home. It's probably the pedals that were the biggest thing for me. So the wheel obviously was very similar to what I had at home, but I've been using a load cell pedal now for about 5 or 6 years. So that muscle memory element of it was really tough to get used to, but I've always been pretty good at adapting to stuff quick. But the other thing that I did was I really, with all the cameras on at round one and all the hype around E-Series and that live event, and I really wanted to do a good job at round one. So I actually jumped onto Facebook Marketplace and bought a Logitech G920 secondhand a week out.
Nice.
And I stopped using my hyper, and because I use VR, and I knew they were going to be on screens, and I knew that the hyper seating position is nothing like the seating position of a Next Level GT Ultimate, I think they were. So what I did was I went back to my desk. I put a Logitech G920 on my desk, which is right next to my hyper, just over to my right, and on that desk just bolted the wheel to the table, used a standard desk chair, used one screen, and I practiced those round one tracks on pretty much very similar equipment to what we were going to be using. And that, I think, made a big difference. Yes, I'm good at adapting to stuff, but I also went out of my way and purchased the same equipment that I was going to be using. And what did I have it for? I had that wheel for 8 days and I sold it on. So, that definitely was worth it.
Yeah. And for you, why did you go into the draft? How did nobody sign you before, like pre-draft?
I don't know. I was hoping that I'd done enough through sim racing to get a seat. So it was a bit of a worry actually, because obviously I wanted to be involved in the E-Series, and we just didn't get. There was leads with teams, and I was almost in the door at a few different places, but just nothing really eventuated. There was a few different opportunities, but they faded as we got closer and went quiet and all that type of thing. So I guess from there I just put my focus into making sure that I smashed it in the draft. So there was that time attack, which I did. So the time attack originally, you only had to be top 20. I made sure I was P1 to put my best foot forward. Everyone was telling me, hey, it doesn't matter, you just need to be P20. I said, no, it's not about that, it matters. I want to be at the top as often as I can be at the top, because having that raw speed and that type of result is going to be really important when you need to be selected. So I made sure I was P1 in the time attack at Bathurst, and then I practiced the hell out of those 3 draft tracks, and had a decent night overall. It was up and down. P2 in the draft, I was really dirty about it at the time, but I was happy. I got pole at Lime Rock by a margin, drove away at Lime Rock the first race. Race 2 I finished dead last. I got taken out in that race and scored basically no points in that reverse grid race. And then race 3 I came from 5th back up to 2nd with a pretty good drive. So I was confident that being P2 in the draft was going to be enough, but I was pretty frustrated that I wasn't P1.
Brady did score. This is Brady Myers. He did do really awesome in the draft, but I think also for him, there were some races that were rerun, I know, for issues. Yeah. But Brady, to me, the fact that he killed it in the reverse grid race and the fact that he led overall points just sold him to all the people to draft him number 1. Like, he was impressive. He had a great. It's like going to the NFL draft combine, and it's like this is the only time they get to see you, because if this is a team that isn't involved in sim racing, they only get to see your like pre-draft workout that you get in other sports. So nobody got to see Brady's past like 3 years. Not that he's not good. Brady's obviously really quick, but they only get to see him in that one day or those couple of days where the event was. But if everyone looks at the history, like I'm like, how can you not take Madison Down number 1?
Well, that's what that's what I was saying to everybody. Is everyone was saying, "Oh, you've been at the top for so long, you've been around for so long, you've had so many good results." And I said, "You know what though? None of that matters for this. There's been no E-Series on iRacing before. So many of these sponsors are not going to know who anyone is. So this draft and this time attack leading into the draft matters a lot, because if you don't get a good result there, that could be your opportunity gone. So I put a lot of pressure on myself and a lot of pressure to perform. And yeah, you're dead right. It was all about that reverse grid race, as it was in a lot of the actual E-Series as well. And I started off the back, and that race got rerun. There was a few technical issues for a couple of the drivers, and it got rerun. In the first edition of that race, I got from 16th to 4th at Laguna Seca, and was so happy. Exited the game and read on the Gfinity Discord that the race is going to be rerun, and I was shattered. I was totally torn apart, because that race I'd had 3 or 4 close calls. I'd driven a faultless race, and I got up to 4th, and knowing that had to all happen again, and that the strategy that I had used in that race, now everyone else knows it. I can't surprise anyone with any weird strategies that I did in that first race. I was absolutely furious about it. I was absolutely so pissed off. I was probably some of the angriest I've been. And then that snowballed when I got taken out in the second race. So I got taken out and I DNF'd. Yeah, finished last. So to basically have a 4th place ripped away from me, where I'd driven such a good race, and then get a DNF as the official result, I was just shattered. But it was one of those things where I had to just try and forget that as quick as I could, and just think big picture and go, you know what, I've got a race win on the board, I've got a DNF on the board, hopefully people see that, but it's all about this last race now. I need to make this last race as good as I can. And, in that race, I got up from 5th up to 2nd and made the best of a bad opportunity.
So you never, negotiated with a team pre-draft? I love... Dane Warren's one of the best, obviously, not only Aussies in sim racing, one of the best sim racers in the world, but, even him, I know that he sort of had a link to Red Bull through someone he knew. I'm not going to go into it too much. So that helped him get the Red Bull seat. Not that he wouldn't have got the Red Bull seat anyway, but it's just you still have to know people, even though a talented guy like him, which is ridiculous, still had to know people to get to the team. I still think he probably would have found his way to Red Bull here, but what I'm trying to say is, for you, maybe it's just the fact that you didn't really have that link to anybody in a real team.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think there was probably a few sim racing teams that had good links. I won't go into detail there, but I probably didn't have the network around me, and I probably didn't do a good enough job in that area to try and build those networks and links to these teams before it all unfolded. I just kind of, like you said, I just kind of assumed that results would be enough, but it's not the case now with the way that the E-Series works. You need to do a good job on the track, but you need to do a good job off the track as well, and that's with negotiating with sponsors, networking with people, being in the right team. We probably, as a team at TTR this year, we had a little bit of a difficult end to last year, both with losing a couple of drivers as well as losing a couple of sponsors. So a lot of the, I guess, connections that we had, not that any of those sponsors were actually involved in the E-Series anyway, but like you said, there was certainly teams and drivers out there that had links to real world teams due to some networks they had either through sponsorships or things they had done in the past, and we just didn't have that, I guess, in TTR. So we had 4 drivers from TTR get into the field, but all of them were through the draft. So we just didn't have that network, unfortunately, to make it happen earlier. But it's something that I hope next year, moving forward, I've tried to do the best job I can for Shannons, and I've really put a lot of effort in to get good results. But I'm really hoping that next year I can be in there before the draft and not have that stress leading into it. But we'll see how we go. It's a long time to go yet, and
Gift in disguise for being drafted by Shannons. Surely they knew you from racing.
Yeah. Oh, look. Yeah, possibly. I mean, I did get told that from Gfinity that going through the draft, every team that had a choice had me on their preferences. So that was nice to hear. It was nice to hear that people had favoured me. But at the same time, it was it was certainly stressful until I got the phone call that I did get selected. It was tough, but hey, well, Shannons has been actually really good. We had, as I said, we had 8 to 10 people from Shannons. I can't remember the exact number. I need to look at this bloody photo we took, but had a bunch of people from Shannons there at round one, and they've been really supportive actually through the whole thing. Which has been good because a lot of those sponsored entries, we weren't really sure on whether they were going to be that enthusiastic about it. Obviously, Shannons was a major sponsor of the E-Series, so but no, they've been really good. I've had messages from countless people who went to that round one showing, as well as a couple of guys in Melbourne as well. So they've been really supportive, and knowing that you've got a sponsor that's actually watching and caring about the results of their car makes a really big difference. And on those days where you've done heaps of practice and you're burnt out and you're over it, and you think, oh, I can't wait for this to be over, you remember all those people, not just family and friends, but also the people who have given you that opportunity, and they're the ones who have invested in you to get good results. So I guess that was the additional thing that made me really want to do well. And I mean, in the end, to finish P4, I was relatively happy with that, especially being, I guess, the first of the people who was drafted and not picked early, as well as being the first of the teams that wasn't real world team affiliated as well.
Yeah, and so I mean, look at the bright side. Number 2 is not a bad, like I said earlier, it's not where you start, it's where you finish. So getting drafted number 2 can be a good thing. Let me name you a few. You're not an NBA fan, are you?
I'm not. I couldn't tell you anything about it, to be honest. Not that I don't like it, I just don't follow it.
For the NBA fans
I'll
who listen to this podcast, here are a number of players who were drafted number 2 in the drafts. Gary Payton, Jason Kidd, Kevin Durant, LaMarcus Aldridge, Victor Oladipo. You got some good players there. NFL, Carson Wentz. Still don't know if he's good. We'll figure it out. Von Miller. Calvin Johnson was drafted number 2. Donovan McNabb, one of my favorites. But also drafted number 2 were Darko Milicic and Hashim Thabit. So sometimes it doesn't work out. Anyway, that's a good sign for you that half of the guys drafted number 2 are some of the greatest Hall of Famers, and the other half are people, absolute busts in the draft. So thank God that you're not on the other end.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like that was the thing for me. I knew with the way that sim racing works, it didn't really matter what car you're in. You can be in a Walkinshaw Andretti United car. You can be in a Shannons car. You could be in a Night Rider Designs car like Margot. You can be in any of the cars in the series. It doesn't actually matter. We've got the same cars. It's all about how you make the setup work for your driving style and take full advantage of that. And so for me, it was just all about making sure I actually get a seat. Because unlike mostly what we do in sim racing, you just put your name down on the forum. Yes, I've entered. Yes, I'm going to race in this series. Go race. And generally speaking, like things like V8 Scops, if you're fast enough, you pre-qualify, get in the race, it's all good. In this series, that's not the case. You need to be the whole package. You've got to be good on track, but you need to be marketable off track. You need to do the right things for the sponsors. You need to do all those other things as well to get picked. And, you saw guys like Hobbo, who, for instance, I don't think he was actually 5th in the draft. I think he was a bit further back than that.
He was
I don't know exactly where,
he scored 9th overall in terms of, I don't know if I'm allowed to reveal this information, but who cares? He was 9th overall. I can say that much in terms of like the scoring on the draft. And Hobbo knows, Hobbo knows he's not bloody, Josh Rogers in a V8, but he's still pretty quick. Like,
yeah, my point is
draft is better than 99% of the iRacing community.
Yeah, correct. And my point is with Hobbo and also Emily as well, one of my teammates. Neither of those two were 5th in the draft. So I believe the top 4. Emily got picked early, I know, but my point is I don't think that those two were probably the fastest 12 in Australia. It's debatable, but they're definitely on the cusp, I guess. And those two do a great job with their streaming. And you said before, to meet Hobbo in real life is like you've met a star. He's huge for sim racing in Australia, not just iRacing, also R Factor and Automobilista and all these other games. He's really, really good with his streaming and his marketability. And that type of thing, and look, don't get me wrong, him and Emily did a fantastic job in the E Series. They were, in my opinion, they were actually even quicker than what I was expecting them to be. They did a really good job. But for them, they're an excellent example of some drivers that have really used their reputation, their marketability, their following to really gain access to that series. Because on pure pace, it might have been a question mark, but with how good of a job that those two do off track, that's something that some of the faster guys could definitely learn from. And I think that's going to be emphasised as we see E Series continue. I'm pretty confident it will.
Yeah.
As we see E Series continue through the next few years, I think you're going to see sim racers becoming a lot more like real racing drivers in terms of their off track marketing.
So for the future of the series, we're going to have to see expansion of the grid next year, right? At least to 12 to, would you say 16 or 20 drivers?
Yeah, I would like to see it raised to 16 to 20. I'm hearing that there's more interest than there is an interest in expanding the grid. I don't know. I mean, that's just all on the rumour mill. I haven't heard any of that from Supercars. It's all just rumoured amongst people. But I think it has to. I think it absolutely has to expand. The only question is how big can it go? Because if you're going to do a live round, can you do a live round with 20 drivers? I'm not sure whether that's going to be something they can afford to do.
At the Gfinity Esports Arena, you have 12 spots there, so it was perfect.
Yeah.
But then I'm not sure if you could really fit anymore. But then I'm thinking, okay, Gfinity's obviously sort of ceased operations in Australia now. They're not going to be running the series next year. But if Supercars just do it in-house, well, then they can probably find a space for 16 or 20 people. They just have to pay for all the sims.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Obviously, it's a lot more investment. But I think with what Supercars has found this year, I've heard that it's been very successful. There's been a lot of positive feedback for them. There's been very little negative feedback from anyone I've seen on social media, or even the people that we expected to be, hey, this is a video game, I don't want to watch it, all that type of crap that you read so often around esports and particularly sim racing. I didn't see much of it. There was a little bit of it, but nowhere near as much as what I expected. And I think Supercars is really going to see all that, and they're going to keep pushing this series. And I think they'll want more cars. I think that having the ZB and the Mustang in iRacing next year will really help. I think you'll see more Ford teams involved because the Commodore, obviously, we've got the Commodore and the Falcon. The Commodore is still the name that Holden uses, despite it being an old car. It still works with their marketing. They still sell Holden Commodores. They don't sell Ford Falcons anymore. So I think one of the big dramas for Ford teams was that they're like, well, we're racing a car that no longer exists. We're not using the Falcon name in our marketing anymore. Until the Mustang comes, we're not involved. So I think that was the direction the Ford teams were thinking, and I think that straight away you're going to have more than 12 cars. If you get a couple of Ford teams, and I can't see companies like Shannons wanting to go anywhere, so you're going to have more than 12 entries.
Yeah, exactly. So then I'm thinking for the future, different format for sure. Like, what I mean by different format is not the race format. I mean like the entire series. Like we had 6 rounds. 16 races? How many do we have?
16 races across 6 rounds, yeah.
And I'm thinking, okay, how about next year now we do something like, all right, we can have 10 rounds, and instead of holding it from like September to, or whenever it started, instead of holding it from like September to November, have it from like June to the end of the year until like November.
Yep.
Spread out over a longer period. Maybe don't have longer races then too. So I don't mind having this format, but do it like V8 Scops. You know, V8 Scops have your endurance rounds, then you have your super sprint rounds, something like that. You know, like we can have this reverse grid format and all this kind of shit. Like have that for rounds 2, 7, 4, and 8. Have 2 endurance rounds, and then just have a normal 1 hour race for the others.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with the longer span of the series. I would probably like to see it run across more months than what it has. It seemed all very condensed and very rushed. But Like particularly those last 3 rounds, that was really tough on the drivers. Now, don't feel sorry for us. But yeah, 9 tracks in 3 weeks is tough. When you got open setup and, many of us are working and trying to earn a living as well as what we can in this, that's hard because, people just say, oh, you got 3 tracks. It's, you just have to share the time out. The reality is everyone was practicing just triple the amount they normally do because you got to practice for 3 tracks. It's that simple. So to be competitive, you had to put the same effort into each track as the other, as what you'd normally do for a normal event like V8 Scops. So that was really tough. I'd like to see probably at least 2 weeks. 2 weeks gap between rounds is probably sufficient. A couple of 3 weeks. It depends on where the Supercars calendar aligns with the E-Series. The format, I think the short races and reverse grid works. I think we've probably seen, or I've seen that personally with Porsche Esports Super Cup. I never used to watch the old Grand Prix races or the endurance races that iRacing did, but that Esports Super Cup, I actually stayed up often. Admittedly, it was Saturday night, so I was quite often up drinking and whatever, but I used to stay up late and watch those races quite often late in the night on Saturday night because they were entertaining. They were really good. And as much as it disadvantaged Rogers with that reverse format, geez, it was exciting to watch.
Yeah.
So,
You've lost me now that you didn't watch the Grand Prix series. I'm done.
You know what? I didn't, I just never found it that interesting. Mind you, I did actually try and qualify for it a couple of times before I got the shits with waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Monday before school. Yeah. But that's not the point. I would have loved to have driven in that series, but to watch it, I don't think I ever sat down and watched a whole race the whole way. I think that for viewing, the E-Series probably needs to keep races fairly short for that sharp entertainment value across that 2-hour period. But I agree. Like we do a Bathurst race on a long distance race. Maybe you work that into the enduro season with real life. But I think what the E-Series has taught me is to look at sim racing as a different perspective. We were actually chatting a bit with Chad after round 1. We went out for some drinks with Gfinity and Chad as well. And one of the things that he really emphasised that I never thought of was, let's not make the E-Series the same as real life, because what's the point in watching the E-Series? We've got supercars already. They do long races. They run at Australian tracks. Because we were saying, it'd be cool to have more Australian content. We should have longer races, 1 race a night. And he goes, why? That's the same as supercars. We're trying to bring a new market in here. We're trying to differentiate this series from what we already have. Let's change it up. Let's do weird and funky camera angles. Let's run at international tracks. Let's run reverse grids. Let's do this stuff that we can't do in real supercars. Yeah. And that kind of, I guess, opened my eyes a bit, because I thought, I've never thought of it from that perspective. I've always thought of it as, let's try and do the same as real life, because that's what the drivers want. But from an entertainment point of view, it makes a lot more sense to do what he said.
You can do it like the NBA will trial new rules in the D League, in the development league. Yeah. And it's like, okay, what if, V8s don't... I mean, has V8s ever had a reverse grid race, supercars?
They did they did for a year in, I think it was 2006, when they were doing the 3-race format. They were doing progressive grids back then, and they did race 1, obviously just qual. Race 2 was a full field reverse grid. Race 3 was combined points. So in 2006, they did basically the same as E-Series, correct? But yeah, imagine a full reverse grid with 30 cars or whatever it was back then. It was absolute carnage, and they, due to costs and stuff like that, they got rid of it. And I think Chad brought up that Dunlop Series did it as well. I think it was 3, 4, 5 years ago, something like that. Dunlop Series trialled it for a year as well. So it's something that Supercars has toyed with quite a lot, but it always gets knocked down due to cost. Now with E-Series, you don't have that cost, I guess. So the entertainment value is there without the consequence.
Yeah, exactly. So look, that's what I'm thinking is keep the same entertainment format. Keep the endurance races. If you do have 10 rounds of the E-Series, maybe have 2 enduros max. Don't have it like, you're watching a million of them.
No. No, I think you've got to keep it relevant. I would kind of like to see, obviously Bathurst has kind of got to be one. It's got to be similar. The Super 2, that tied in well with Super 2, 250 Ks, and then Super 2 did it the week later as well. I thought that tied in well. It probably wasn't the most, well, I thought it was crap, but I didn't race anyone that race. We were horribly off the pace and I was nowhere and barely saw a car, so it was shit boring for me. But maybe it was okay to watch on TV, but yeah, I think you need to tie those enduros in with the real world in some degree, like maybe a race around, I think we need to incorporate the Belle Isle Street Circuit in some way, shape or form, maybe a bit of a Gold Coast style enduro there, with two longer
Long
races
Beach?
maybe.
Long Beach?
Yeah,
No, I'm just
Long
joking.
Beach should be great, but I think it would look rubbish on the broadcast with the wireframe. But it was something we discussed. We were saying as drivers last night, how cool would it be to run at Long Beach?
Now, everyone's been saying that for a decade now, but it's
Yeah.
it's when it happens. What was I going to say? I still can't believe how you all tested for 3 different tracks in a week. Like when I was racing FSR in the World Championship, a back-to-back race was tough for me. 1 week, like.
Yep.
I struggled to get a setup done. I think there was 1 round at Suzuka. I just was horrible. I was like the first time all season, I think I qualified outside the top 10 maybe. And the setup was bad. I had no laps in me. Even when I commentated on the Grand Prix series, which you never fucking watch, mate. But
Yeah.
even even when I did that, like I felt even as a broadcaster doing back-to-back races, I was like, oh, like I want to go out on this Saturday night, and I can't be bothered doing 2 races in a row. But I like racing, real or sim, so you got to do it. But
Yeah,
man,
I know. I figured
congratulations.
out now. I figured out now actually why I might have forgotten about you then, because
Yeah.
I didn't even realize that you commentated the Grand Prix series because I didn't watch it.
Oh,
So there you go.
yeah, I
Sorry
did
to
it
say.
my viewers will know this. I did it from 2014, 2015 to 2018.
All
So
right. So you'll be able to see on my screen now. I've all turned red in embarrassment because
no, I'm not.
yeah.
Mate, it's not like I'm not arrogant. Like I expect you to know me. It's not
I
like that. I'm not that like
I
popular.
used to, admittedly, the ones I watched back then were in the Hutu days. But to get back to your question,
Yeah.
like the old Williams days. But to get back to your question, oh yeah, it was really really tough. Like that 3 race format. I look, I actually really still want to see it again. As I said, I think entertainment wise it was good. I agree with what Chad Nailon says about trying to keep it differentiated, where you're never going to see a supercar run at Silverstone. I think I said that on the last broadcast. It's all right, and we get to see a lot of these tracks. And I think next year change it up with some new tracks. Visit some that we didn't visit this year. But I really like the format. It's just as a driver, far out. It was really tough, like really, really hard, because you're
Yeah, I feel you.
developing 3 setups and just the driving element of it as well. Like that last round, Oran Park, Phillip Island, Bathurst, you pretty much can't get 3 more tracks that are that different to each other. It was just like you're just trying to come up with something. You can't use the same setup track to track. I found you could use similar base setups, but you still pretty much had to make a setup from the ground up for each track. The car, when you're talking about how competitive that series is or was in 2019, it's not enough to just pull a setup that you've got in the history banks and go again. It's just not that simple. Like we visited a lot of these tracks in V8 Scops in the past, and I didn't even, in a lot of cases, I didn't even use the V8 Scops set we had actually developed, because we had come so far through the E-Series in setup development that the V8 Scops setups weren't relevant. They were so far off the pace because everyone had lifted to a new level. So it was just ridiculously competitive.
Yeah. Anything to plug before we go? You are a VRS coach. You've got a Twitch page now. You're everywhere, mate.
Trying to be. As I said, we've got to do a good job with the promotional side of it these days. Virtual Racing School has been great for me. I've worked for them now for, 2.5 years roughly. I think mid-2017 we got involved with Virtual Racing School. So Yeah, you can find me doing data packs for the V8 Supercar. It's probably going to become pretty popular in the next few months whenever this ZB and Mustang come out. I don't know when that's happening, but
Yep.
I'm hoping next season. So hopefully we got a new car to work with those VRS data packs, and get some good baseline setups out to the people pretty quickly. But yeah, you can book coaching with me, as well as the other Aussie coaches with Josh Rogers, Jake Burton, Jared Filsell. So some of the basically 4 of those coaches finished top 5 in the Supercars Eseries this year. So you got good people to learn from if you want to get those coaching sessions. But yeah, VRS has been a great sponsor of mine as well. So do this work for them, as well as sponsoring me in the V8 Sculpt series. So they've been fantastic, and what they do for sim racing is just bloody awesome. Like to have a service where, and I gotta say, I use it. If I'm going to race a GT3 car or something like that, just randomly I jump on, download a set because I know it's going to be competitive. So it's to have that service to fall back on. It's become part of iRacing now that you just go and grab the VRS data pack set for a random race that you do, because you know that that's a good benchmark set. It's going to be at most a tenth or two off the pace at most. So yeah, it's certainly a great service.
We got to bring you back on. I'll bring you back on next year or something, because we didn't get a chance to talk about VRS, TTI or anything, but or even Scops. We didn't delve into Scops that much, but
there's so much to talk about.
Yeah, I know. Jeez, mate. Oh, let's go for another fucking hour.
Yeah, why not?
So I doubt anyone's trip to work or their workout's like 90 minutes long, so they probably had to pause this about 50 minutes in. So the criticism I have with VRS, and I can't believe I've actually found one, because VRS is such an awesome platform, is there was a race once I did in the, I think it was the F3 at Watkins Glen. I hardly race on iRacing, by the way, but this is the 1 week I decided to do so. And everybody around me were running VRS sets, but I had my own home-built set. So it felt like Formula One, where it was like, I'm in the Red Bull. Well, actually not anymore. The Mercedes is like the worst in a straight line now. But I was lacking like 12 kilometers an hour in straight line speed. Everybody else had the exact same setup. And I enjoyed that because I was running a different setup, if you get what I mean. But when everyone was running the same setup, I felt like it just took out of the, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know you get what I'm saying? And plus, like, I feel like people should be the VRS coaching, and here's where I'm going to counter my criticism. It should be used, the setups there should be used as guides, not as spoon feeding. So people should look at how you've developed it, and they shouldn't just steal it and be like, oh, I've got a setup for this week. No, learn how they did it. Learn how Madison developed this setup, because that's how I learned it in sim racing, was trial and error. We didn't have VRS coaches back in the day.
Hey, yeah, when me and you started back in R Factor, I remember very early on, it only took a week, and no one sent me a setup after a week. So when you're up the front of a series, like how I pretty much have been since 2010, if I go on the forum in iRacing, to give you this argument, if I go on the forum in iRacing and ask someone for a V8 Supercar setup, I'm not going to get one. Not a chance, because
you're gonna get your own sent back to you.
Yeah, correct. I'm just not going to get given anything. And that's, it is very secretive these days in the V8 Supercar, unfortunately. It's kind of the way it's gone with all this competition level. But I agree with you. I think this year, when we lost Jared Filsell out of our team, last year we were using as a team Jared's sets. And we had all kind of forgotten how to actually set the car up. And it was a rude shock this year when Jared was gone, because it was like, oh my God, we've actually got to relearn to set the car up. But what I've discovered is that, or rediscovered, I really should say, is that when you set the car up so that you actually like it and it matches your driving ability, that makes a big difference. And that's something that a lot of people don't understand that with Virtual Racing School. We post a setup that people can use, and we've done, say, at Mount Panorama, I might have done a 204.3, for instance, on, say, an E-Series set or whatever it is, and then, in that data pack, people can drive that same set that I've used and compare their driving on a level playing field on the same weather conditions to that setup. But what they then need to do is, because that sorts their driving out. They know where they're at with their driving. What they need to then do is then take that set as the base and start tweaking it and learning from it. And that's something where the coaching element might come in. Like we normally get people for coaching that want driving and improvement. In a lot of cases, we could probably give a similar service in terms of setup as well.
Yeah, 100%. That was very well answered, by the way. We'll leave you to it. Your Twitter handle's been there all podcast. Thanks for coming on, mate.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Shannons Racing Report. Hope your workout or your drive to work took 90 minutes or two 45-minute splits, two-stop strategy, and you sort of paused it halfway through, came back and listened for the other 45, 8 hours later in your day. Whatever floats your boat. But it's available at the ShannonsRacingReport.com. Exciting new content coming out on our exciting new homepage. So check out the website. Plenty of things available for the future. I just don't want to delve into too many. I can't say too much. That's the problem. But just stay tuned. So subscribe, whether that's YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. Like the podcast page on Facebook. Follow myself on Twitter. You can keep up to date on not only the podcast, but any of my commentary endeavors or just journalistic endeavors too. But that's episode 93 all wrapped up. See you soon. Got some exciting guests lined up over the next few weeks and some exciting shows too. I think you know what I'm on about. See you soon.